reception of Charles I. Since the time of Queen Elizabeth, when the surrounding estate was purchased by the Herberts, Powis Castle has been the seat of the Earls Powis. There are naturally various legends connected with this time-honoured dwelling, one being that the lake in the castle park, from which the adjacent town of Welshpool takes its name, shall sometimes overflow and deluge the town. But there is also a well-authenticated and most circumstantial ghost story of Powis Castle, for the record of which we are indebted to the autobiography of Thomas Wright of Berkenshaw. In 1780, it became known to the townsfolk of Welshpool that there was living amongst them a certain poor unmarried woman who had conversed with the castle ghost, and that it had confided a great secret to her. The woman thus selected for this alleged trust was a member of the Methodist Society, and had become serious upon their ministry. Mr. John Hampson, a well-known preacher amongst the Wesleyan Methodists, being desirous of probing this strange story to the core, sent for the woman, and earnestly besought her to tell him the whole truth about the affair. She promised to give him as exact an account as she possibly could, and then proceeded with the following narration, to the correctness of which many persons could bear witness. She described herself as a poor woman who obtained a livelihood by spinning hemp and lino, and stated that it was customary for the farmers and gentlemen of the district to grow enough hemp or line in their fields for their own home consumption, and as she was a good hand at spinning, she was accustomed to go from house to house to inquire for work. It was the custom at houses where she stayed to provide her with meat and drink, and if necessary with lodging, whilst she was thus employed, and when she left, to make her some little present. One day she chanced to call at Earl Powis's country residence, Red Castle as it was called, to inquire for work according to custom. The quality, as she termed the family, were at this time in London, but had, as usual, left the steward and his wife with certain other servants to take charge of the place during their absence. The steward's wife set her to work, and in the evening told her that she must stay all night with them, as they had more work for her to do next day. When it was time to go to bed, 3 of the servants, each carrying a lighted candle in her hand, conducted her to the room she was to sleep in. It was an apartment on the ground floor, with a boarded floor and 2 sash windows, and was grandly furnished with a handsome bedstead in one corner of it. They had made up a good fire for her, and had placed a chair and table before it, with a large lighted candle upon the table. They informed her that that was to be her bedroom, and that she might go to bed whenever she pleased. They then wished her a good night, and all withdrew together, pulling the door quickly after them, so as to hasp the spring's neck in the brass lock that was upon it. slight astonishment that they should put such a person as she was in so fine a room and so comfortable a bed, with all the conveniences of fire, chair, table, and candle. And having made a survey of the place, she sat down and took out her pocket a small Welsh Bible, which she always carried about her, and in which she always read a chapter, chiefly in the New Testament, before she said her prayers and retired to rest. Whilst the woman was reading, she heard the door open, and turning her head, was astonished to see a gentleman enter the room. He wore a gold-laced hat and waistcoat, with coat and the rest of his attire to correspond. He walked down by the sash window to the corner of the room, and then returned. When he came, as he returned to the first window, the bottom of which was nearly breast high, he rested his elbow on the bottom of the window, and the side of his face upon the palm of his hand, and stood in that leaning posture for some time, with his side partly towards her. She looked at him earnestly to see if she knew him, but although from her frequent intercourse with them she had a personal knowledge of all the family and its retainers, he appeared to be a perfect stranger to her. She supposed afterwards that he stood in this manner to encourage her to speak, but as she did not utter a word, after some little time he walked off, pulling the door to after him as the servants had done previously. She began now to be much alarmed, concluding it to be an apparition, and that they had put her in that grand room because it was haunted, and that was really the case. For some long time past, the room had been so disturbed that nobody could sleep in it peacefully, and as she passed for a very serious woman, the servants conceived the fine project of putting the poor Methodist and the spirit together in order to see what the result would be. Startled at the thought that it was an apparition she had seen, the woman rose from her chair and, kneeling down by the bedside, began saying her prayers. Whilst she was praying, the apparition came in again, walked round the room, and came close behind her. She now endeavoured to speak, but when she attempted it, she was so agitated that she could not utter a word. The apparition walked out of the room again, pulling the door after it as it had done before. She begged that God would strengthen her and not suffer her to be tried beyond what she was able to bear. She now recovered her spirits somewhat, and thought she felt more confidence and resolution, and determined, if it came in again, she would speak to it if possible. Presently it came in again, walked around the room, and came behind her as before. She turned her head and said, "Pray, sir, who are you, and what do you want?" It lifted its finger and said, "Take up the candle and follow me, and I will tell you." She got up, took up the candle, and followed it out. Of the room, it led her through a long boarded passage till they got to the door of another room, which it opened and went into. It was a very small room, or what might be called a large closet. As the room was small, and I believed him to be a spirit, she said in her recital of the affair, I stopped at the door. He turned and said, "Walk in, I will not hurt you." So I walked in. He said, "Do you see that box?" I said, "Yes, I do." He then stepped to one side of the room and showed me a crevice in the wall where he said a key was hid that would open it. He said, "This box and key must be taken out and sent to the Earl in London," naming the Earl and his place of residence in the metropolis. He said, "Will you see it done?" I said, "I will do my best to get it done." He said, "Do, and I will trouble the house no more." It then walked out of the room and left her. As soon as the woman saw that the apparition had departed, she went to the room door and set up a loud shout. The steward and his wife, together with all the other servants, ran to her immediately. They were all clinging to one another and carrying lights. It seems that they had all been waiting to see the issue of the interview between the woman and the apparition. They asked her what was the matter. She then told them all that had taken place and showed them the box. The steward dare not meddle with it, but his wife was of a more courageous temperament, and with the assistance of the other servants, tugged it out and found the key in the place indicated by the apparition. The woman stated that, by the way in which they lifted it, it appeared to be pretty heavy, but that she did not see it opened, and therefore did not know what it contained. Whether money or writings of importance to the family, or both. The servants took it away with them, and the woman averred that she then went to bed and slept peacefully till the morning. It appeared, from what was subsequently learnt, that the box and its contents were sent to the Earl in London, together with an account of how it was discovered and by whom. The Earl immediately set down orders to his steward to inform the poor woman, who had been the means of this discovery, that if she would come and reside in his family, she should be comfortably provided for the remainder of her days. Or, if she did not care to reside constantly with them, if she would let him know when she wanted assistance, she should be liberally supplied at his lordship's expense as long as she lived. And according to the account related by Mr. John, Hampson, it was a fact well known to the neighbourhood that the woman had been supplied from the Earl's family ever since the time when the affair was said to have happened. Well, that's where that story ends, so we will never really know what was inside the box. Okay, let to tell the story, basing our narrative upon the account which was given in the Times newspaper of August the 16th, 1868. It was on the night of the 11th of May, 1812, according to the version of the story told by the Times during the lifetime of Mr. Williams, that gentleman, then residing at Scoria House, near Redruth in Cornwall, awoke his wife, and in great agitation informed her that he had dreamt he was in the lobby of the House of Commons, and had seen a man shoot with a pistol a gentleman who had just entered the lobby, and who was said to be the Chancellor. Mrs. Williams very naturally replied that it was only a dream, and endeavoured to calm her husband by recommending him to go to sleep again. He did fall asleep again, but shortly afterwards awoke his wife, and told her that he had had the same dream a second time. Upon this, Mrs. Williams suggested that he had been so disturbed by his former dream that it had probably dwelt on his mind, and therefore begged him to try and compose himself and go to sleep, which he did. Once more, for the third time, the vision was repeated, whereupon, notwithstanding his wife's entreaties that he would be quiet and try to forget the affair, Mr. Williams arose and dressed himself, it then being between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. At breakfast, Mr. Williams's sole subject of conversation was the vivid dreams by which his night's rest had been disturbed. In the afternoon, he had occasion to go to Falmouth, where he gave every acquaintance he met particulars of his strange visions. The following day, Mr. Tucker of Tremston Castle, accompanied by his wife, a daughter of Mr. Williams, visited at Scoria House. No sooner were the family greetings over than Mr. Williams related his wonderful dream to the new arrivals, as Mrs. Williams laughingly remarked to her daughter, her father would not even allow Mr. Tucker to be seated before he told him of his nocturnal visitation. Upon hearing his father-in-law's statement, Mr. Tucker observed that it might do very well in a dream to have the Chancellor in the lobby of the House of Commons, but that he would never be found there in reality. Subsequently, Mr. Tucker inquired what sort of a man the person shot appeared to be, and when Mr. Williams described him with great minuteness, he remarked, "Your description is not at all that of the Chancellor, but is certainly exactly that of Mr. Percival." The Chancellor of the Exchequer, and although he has been to me the greatest enemy I ever met with, for a supposed cause which had no foundation in truth, or words to that effect, I should be exceedingly sorry indeed to hear of his being assassinated, or of any injury of the kind happening to him. Mr. Tucker then asked Mr. Williams if he had ever seen Mr. Percival, and was told that he never had seen him, nor had ever even written to seen a gentleman there who had come by that evening's mail from London, who said that he was in the lobby of the House of Commons on the evening of the 11th when a man called Bellingham had shot Mr. Percival, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and that as it might occasion some great ministerial changes and might affect Mr. Tucker's political friends, he had come out as fast as he could to make him acquainted with it, having heard at Truro that he had passed through that place in the afternoon on his way to Scoria House. After the astonishment which this unexpected fulfilment of the dream caused him a little subsided, Mr. Williams most particularly described the appearance and dress of the man whom he beheld in his dreams fire the pistol, as he had previously described Mr. Percival. Some 6 weeks after the fatal affair, Mr. Williams, having business in London, availed himself of the opportunity to go, accompanied by a friend, to the House of Commons, where, as has already been stated, he had never been before. As soon as he came to the steps at the entrance of the lobby, he stopped and said, "This place is as distinctly within my recollection in my dream as any room in my house," and he repeated the observation when he entered the lobby. He then pointed out the exact spot where Bellingham stood, and which Mr. Percival had reached when he was struck by the ball, and where and how he fell. The dress and appearance of both Mr. Percival and his assassin, Bellingham, are declared to have agreed exactly, even to the most minute particular, with the descriptions given by Mr. Williams. The Times, when furnishing its readers with this wonderful story, drew attention to the fact that Mr. Williams was still alive, and would therefore have denied any inaccuracy in their account, whilst many of the witnesses to whom he had made known the particulars of his dreams directly after he had had them were also living. Moreover, added the editor, he had received the whole statement from a correspondent of unquestionable veracity. Okay. So let us do others who knew him. The narrative enclosed by Caswell of the apparition, as written out by the curate, the Reverend Thomas Wilkins, on the 15th of December 1695, is as follows. At Warblington, near Havant, Hampshire, within 6 miles of Portsmouth, in the parsonage house, dwelt Thomas Purse, the tenant, with his wife and child, a manservant Thomas and a maidservant, about the beginning of August 1695, on a Monday, about 9 or 10 at night, all being gone to bed except the maid with the child, she being in the kitchen and having raked up the fire, took a candle in one hand and the child in the other arm, and turning about, saw someone in a black gown walking through the room, and thence out of the door into the orchard. Upon this, the maid hasting upstairs, having recovered but 2 steps, cried out, on which the master and mistress ran down, found the candle in her hand, she grasping the child about its neck with the other arm. She told them the reason of her crying out. She would not that night tarry in the house, but removed to another belonging, to one Henry Salter, farmer, where she cried out all the night from the terror she was in, and she could not be persuaded to go to the house upon any terms. On the morrow, Tuesday, the tenant's wife came to me, lodging then at Havant, to desire my advice and have consultation with some friends about it. I told her I thought it was a flam, and that they had a mind to abuse Mr. Brereton, the rector, whose house it was. She desired me to come up. I told her I would come up and sit up, or lie there as she pleased, for then, as to all stories of ghosts or apparition, I was an infidel. I went thither and sat up the Tuesday night with the tenant and the manservant. About 12 or 1 o'clock I searched all the rooms in the home to see if anybody were hid there to impose upon me. At last we came into a lumber room. There I smiling told the tenant that was with me that I would call for this apparition, if there was any, and oblige him to come. The tenant then seemed to be afraid, but I told him I would defend him from harm, and then I repeated Barbara, Seller and Darrell, etc., jestingly. On this the tenant's countenance changed, so that he was ready to drop down with fear. Then I told him I perceived he was afraid, and I would prevent its coming, and repeated Paralipton, etc. And then he recovered his spirits pretty well, and we left the room and went down into the kitchen where we were before, and sate up there the remaining part of the night, and had no manner of disturbance. Thursday night, the tenant and I lay together in one room, and he saw something walk along in a black gown, and place itself against a window, and there stood for some time, and then walked off. Friday morning, the man relating this, I asked him why he did not call me, and I told him I thought that it was a trick or flam. He told me the reason why he did not call me was that he was not able to speak or move. Friday night we lay as before, was near, and went immediately to bed again. I went in 3 or 4 steps, and it being a moonlight light, I saw the apparition move from the bedside and stop up against the wall that divided their room and mine. I went and stood directly against it, within my arm's length of it, and asked it, in the name of God, what it was that made it come disturbing of us. I stood some time expecting an answer, and receiving none, and thinking it might be some fellow hid in the room to fright me. I put out my arm to feel it, and my hand seemingly went through the body of it, and felt no manner of substance, till it came to the wall. Then I drew back my hand, and still it was in the same place. Till now, declares Mr. Wilkins, I had not the least fear, and even now had very little. Then I adjured it to tell me what it was. When I had said those words, it, keeping its back against the wall, moved gently along towards the door. I followed it, and it, going out of the door, turned its back towards me. It went a little along the gallery. I followed it a little into the gallery, and it disappeared, where there was no corner for it to turn. And before it came to the end of the gallery, were the stairs. Then I found myself very cold from my feet as high as my middle, though I was not in great fear. I went into the bed betwixt the tenant and his man, and they complained of my being exceedingly cold. The tenant's man leaned over his master in the bed, and saw me stretch out my hand towards the apparition, and heard me speak the words. The tenant also heard the words. The apparition seemed to have a morning gown of a darkish colour, no hat nor cap, short black hair, a thin, meagre visage of a pale, swarthy colour, seemed to be of about 45 or 50 years old, the eyes half shut, the arms hanging down, the hands visible beneath the sleeves, of a middle stature. I related this description to Mr. John Lardner, rector of Havant, and to Major Batten of Langstone, in Havant parish. They both said the description agreed very well to Mr. Pitfield, a former rector of the place, who has been dead above 20 years. Upon this, the tenant and his wife left the house, which has remained void since. The Monday after last Michaelmas, resumes Mr. Wilkins, a man of Jodson in Warwickshire, having been at Havant, passed by the foresaid parsonage house about 9 or 10 at night, and saw a light in most of the rooms of the house, his pathway being close by the house. He, wondering at the light, looked into the kitchen window, and saw only a light, but turning himself to go away, he saw the appearance of a man in a long gown. He made haste away. The apparition followed him over a piece of glebe land of several acres to a lane, which he crossed, and over a little meadow, and then over another lane to some place which belongs to Farmer Henry Salter, my landlord, near a barn in which were some of the farmer's men and some others. This man went into the barn, told them how he was frightened, and followed from the parsonage house by an apparition which they might see standing against the pails if they went out. They this has been